Hello and welcome to part 9 of our Python 3 Basics tutorial series. In this video what we're going to be talking about is the elif statement. So generally you're going to see this if, elif, else. And the idea here is to add yet another layer of logic to our pre-existing if and then if else statements. So if you recall, the if statement just runs if the statement is true. The else statement will run if the preceding if statement is false and does not run. But we saw that we could not do if, else, and have all of the ifs, or rather have the else be contingent on all of the ifs. So this is obviously something that we might want. We might want to say if A is the case, then do something. If B is the case, then do something. If C is the case, then do something. And if A, B, C is not the case, then do something else. We would obviously want to do this in many circumstances. So the way that we can do that in Python is with the elif statement. And this is very similar. Elif is just short for else if. And else if is in other languages like PHP and so on. Now, there is nothing wrong with writing multiple ifs. So multiple ifs just will basically create a hard fork, so to speak. If one of those ifs is true, it's going to continue on that if statement's path. But if you want all of the statements, the if statements, to be contingent on each other, then you will use the elif statement. Also, if you have a bunch of if statements, every single if will be tested, even if one of the ifs is true. In the elif scenario, the elifs will only run if the previous ifs or previous elifs do not run. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is actually show some examples, because this can get confusing if we're just saying it. So let's show some examples of how this works. So we're going to say x equals 3, y equals 7, and z equals 10. Okay. Now we're going to move these up a little bit. Make some space. So now we have x, y, and z. So we can say something like this. We can say if x is greater than y, which obviously we can see it is not the case, but if it is, we'll print x is greater than y. Then what we had done before is else print and nothing was the case. Now what we can do though is we can use elif. So we can throw an elif statement in here, and we can see elif x is less than z. We can print x is less than z. And in fact, let's retain what we have been doing before. We'll say x comma and then comma y comma z, and then we'll fix this one here, x comma, like that. Okay, so now we can save and run this, and we do get 3 is less than 10. So that ran this else statement, x is less than z. Now what if we were to change this to a less than? So in this scenario, x is less than y. Is that true? Yes, it is. 3 is less than 7. So here we saw that the elif statement was the only statement that actually ran here, right? So if was false, elif was true, so the else statement did not run. Now in this scenario, what we're about to do is we're asking if x is less than y, which it is, so we can run that. And it says 3 is less than 7, so in this scenario only one of these ran. And again, these two did not. So really, in this scenario, only one of all of these statements can actually end up running in the end. Now, the other thing that we can do is let's return this back to this. So we run this, 3 is less than 10. Let's make this a greater than, and then is greater than, and then this needs to be greater as well. So we can save and run that, and we see nothing was the case. Now what we can do though is we can ask another elif statement. Elif y is greater than z, print y is greater than z. So now we have multiple elif statements that we're going to check. We'll run that. Nothing was the case. Now, what if? See, here we're asking if x is greater than z. If we change this to less than, x is 3, so it is less than z, which is 10. Now, we're asking here if y is greater than z, which it's not, but what if we say that y is less than z? And now we have less than z. Now we have two elif statements here that are true. So what is going to happen in this scenario? Well, this, again, is only going to run one of the statements. It's basically going to check this one, and if this one's false, it runs to this one, and if this one's false, it will run to this one. But if this one is true, then it's going to break, and everything, or break, I guess I shouldn't have, we haven't really talked much about break. But what break does is you have like a block of code, and if you want to get out of that block of code at some point, break is literally a Python command. So break. Some people hear break and they think the script breaks, and some people literally will say the script broke. And actually what they mean is they threw an error and the script stopped. But anyway, so in this scenario, these two statements are true, but let's see what happens. So we run it, and the only one we get is 3 is less than 10, which was this one, right? X is 3 and z is 10. So this one was the only one that ran because these are elif statements. So even though these two were true, only this one ran. So if you were trying to check for multiple conditions, you wouldn't use the elif statement. You would use multiple if statements. Okay. Now, what if you want to combine multiple ifs and elifs, and you want them to be contingent on the multiple ifs? This is also possible. So you might want to you might think like, okay, if x is greater than y, or x less than z, something like that, right? Let's see if that would run. So we save and run that, and we get 3 is greater than 7. Well, we actually meant, well, in this case, it's hard to do this one because it's hard to write the print statement here, but something here was the case. Let's run that. So this statement rang true, this one. So nothing else ran. And basically what we used is just the OR command here. So we haven't actually covered OR, but this is basically what you could do with OR. So you could say if x is greater than y or x is less than z, run this. So OR, you could almost think of OR as another if, right? So you could keep adding ORs here, or. The other thing you can do, even though we've kind of got it covered, but you could also say if x is less than y, but you can also do this. If x is less than y and x is less than z, something here was the case. So you can use OR and you can use AND. Now obviously in this scenario it's kind of silly because we could just do this, right? You could say that, and that encompasses this entire, that whole line originally, because x is less than those two things. But maybe you want to compare two separate things entirely. So maybe you want to compare, you know, maybe you've got 15 variables and you're just trying to compare two totally separate variables or something like that. So anyway, that was a lot of stuff to cover with the if statement. Originally it started with just our if, then we hit the else, then we had elif, and then we found out, oh my goodness, we can have and we can have or, and you could of course put ors down here and ands down here and all kinds of stuff, so you can really mix and match for pretty quickly some very deep logic and conditional checking. So anyway, just to quickly recap, if statement just runs if the condition is true. Elif will only run if the previous statement, either an elif or an if, was false, even if the elif is a true statement. So if the elifs or if preceding the elif statement is true, the elif will not run, even if it was true. As opposed to multiple if statements where they will all run if they are true. Whereas in this scenario, even though these are two true statements, we only had one thing run. So if you really wanted to make multiple checks, you would have if. But anyway. And then the else statement, of course, runs only if the preceding ifs and elif stackings are all false. And obviously there's no if, or there's no you know, truth checking to the else statement. It just plain runs if nothing else ran. So anyways, that concludes chapter 9 and a slightly more complex issue. In the next chapter, chapter 10, we're going to be covering basic functions. So we're continuing to build on the complexity here, but have no fear, functions are pretty simple, but there are a lot of aspects and characteristics to functions, so we'll definitely be digging in there. So stay tuned for chapter 10, and thanks for watching.